Radical acceptance. What is radical acceptance? Radical acceptance is the acceptance that climate change and the various planetary boundaries that we are now crossing is at a point where we can't reverse it, we can't change it, and we can't change the trajectory that it is on. And the system now has a life of its own. The emissions that are in the atmosphere, it is actually, we would be breaking the laws of physics if we thought that we could turn climate change around by reabsorbing all the carbon dioxide that we've released from buried carbon from oil and coal. Radical acceptance it's a process. You go through grief, you go through the process of grieving for the planet in real time. And there are various stages. There are stages of grief. One of the stages of grief is bargaining. Bargaining is that thing where if we're grieving something that's lost, we want to save it. We want to save it one way or the other. If I'd done this, or if I'd done that, or if we do this, or if we do that. We are at that point where there's actually nothing much that we can do collectively, individually. But that's not what radical acceptance doesn't then say, well, you just give up and do nothing. Radical acceptance is about you go through the process of grief, and then what you do is you carry on as you were before, while understanding that you're still not going to change much. And actually one of the things about radical acceptance is that it makes space in your life for other things, that actually climate action doesn't have to be about going out and doing massive campaigns and being on the streets in London. Climate action is a whole variety of things. And, you know, there's no one solution fits all with climate action. But one of the things that we do, and certainly survivalists do this, and the reason that they do this is we spend a lot of time in nature, and so I'm spending a lot of time planting things. I plant a lot of trees, and I plant a lot of other native species of plants that should be in our environment but have disappeared. A lot of wildflowers, etc. And these small acts of kind of defiance against the destruction, it's a really important way of understanding our predicament and being able to talk openly about it. I'm not really interested in people who can't even acknowledge that climate change is real, but I do have issues with people who are just constantly pushing out a message which is like, oh, you can't talk to people about, you can't tell the truth about climate emergency because, you know, what happens if someone freezes? Well, that's not really how the freeze response works, but, you know, people generally either glaze over because they're not interested. There are lots of people who just don't want to talk about climate change because it's just too much. Fine, I'm not going to pressure them. And then there are people who don't want to talk about climate change because it's kind of too much for them to compute, so they just go into this denial cycle. Yeah, I'm not going to talk to them either. I can't be asked with them anymore. And then there are the people who just kind of, well, I'll mention some bits of climate change, but I won't mention others because I don't want to kind of overburden people with all the risks, but actually some of those risks are really serious. So, for example, wet bulb temperatures, we really should be talking to people about wet bulb temperatures because they're really serious risks, they're very short term, and they can be avoided and mitigated for, not by everyone, but by most people. People seem to be more worried about, and especially with AMOC collapse, is sub-zero conditions, which humans are actually really perfectly adapted for. Unfortunately, our civilization, especially in some parts of Europe, are just not adapted for the type of conditions that an AMOC collapse could bring about. But, you know, that we can get through these things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that when sewage backs up and isn't taken away, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be an outbreak of some terrible disease like typhoid or something, because most people in this country were vaccinated for typhoid when they were young, and so no, that's unlikely to happen. There might be minor stomach upsets and so on when people's water isn't well purified or doesn't come through properly because the system shuts down, but those sort of things are easily solved. And actually, one of the things about survivalists is that we're not all loners in our bunkers. Some of us are very much community minded, and one of the things that I can do is that I do have the capability of sterilizing thousands, hundreds of thousands of liters of water and making it safe to drink. So I actually could be running a small scale water purification plant here for the whole community, at least for 100 houses around me. And this is the thing about survivalism, is that survivalism has a poor rap, and people think it's loners in bunkers, and that's really not the case.